Take a look at what happened.
Donald Trump has been shot. His 20-year-old attacker has been killed by the American Secret Service. The former president has survived, vowing to fight on after a bullet ripped his skin. This morning, we will be live in Pennsylvania, where the shooting took place at a rally as he campaigns to return to the White House. The new Prime Minister, who was in Washington himself just days ago with President Biden, has condemned the attack, saying there is no place for political violence. As his government prepares its plans before its first King's Speech on Wednesday, what about the dangers to politicians here? The new Leader of the Commons, Lucy Powell, a new member of the Cabinet, is with us this morning. We'll be speaking also to Nigel Farage, a friend of Donald Trump and the leader of Reform UK. And we'll hear from perhaps the most powerful Conservative left in the country, Lord Houchen, the Mayor of Tees Valley. He'll join us later as well. And of course, there is one other huge story in town. We will be in Berlin with the BBC's Kelly Summers, who's been with the England team pitchside for weeks.
Gareth Southgate and his squad only the 5th team to make it to back-to-back Euros finals, the first English men's team to make it to a final overseas. Can they make history and win it and go one better than they did 3 years ago at Wembley?
And my team at the desk for the next 60 minutes, Kim Leadbeater, Labour MP, Samuel Kasumu, former Conservative advisor, and Greg Jackson, the boss of Octopus Energy. Welcome to you all. Morning, morning. Let's start, as we always do, with what's making the news. And there are huge headlines around the world this morning. On the front page of the New York Times, Trump is safe after an assassination attempt at a political rally. What's happened to Donald Trump leads the BBC to, of course, the Sunday Times website carries one of those incredible images on its front page. The Sunday Telegraph features the dreadful events in Pennsylvania too. There is, of course, however, huge interest in what will happen in Berlin tonight. The Express, the Mirror and the Mail on Sunday splash on the hopes for England in Berlin. And we will talk about that a little bit later in the programme. But let's start with this moment last night when Donald Trump was shot while on stage.
What happened?
There was shock and anger among the thousands who had gathered to hear him speak.
We noticed a guy crawling, bear crawling up the roof of the building beside us, 50 feet away from us. So we're standing there, we're pointing at the guy crawling up the roof.
And he had a gun, right?
He had a rifle.
A rifle.
We could clearly see him with a rifle.
When I was sitting there, a guy said, "Oh God, he had a gun." I looked up, there's a guy on top of the building, right over there, with an M16, with a blanket, pointing at the president. He starts shooting. Bow, 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 bow. About 4 to 5 shots rang out.
I heard the shots. I thought it was firecrackers to begin with. Somebody over there was screaming, "He's been shot."
Huge questions about how this could have happened. President Biden has condemned the event.
The idea that there's political violence or violence in America like this is just unheard of. It's just not appropriate. And everybody must condemn it. Everybody. I'll keep you informed, and if I am able to speak to Donald, I'll let you know that as well.
Well, Jenny Kumar, our BBC colleague, is in Pennsylvania for us this morning. Jenny, it's the early hours of the morning. What's going on the ground there now?
Well, when we arrived, we were right by the scene. We were moved on. The police extended the cordon for our own safety. So we're at the edge of the cordon right now. You can see the police vehicles behind me. And in the last few hours, we've had a bit more detail about the shooter that was involved. Matthew Crooks, 20 years old, from Bethel Park, which is about an hour's drive from here. He's been named by the FBI as a subject involved in this. The US media is reporting he was a registered Republican voter, but federal campaign finance reports also show he donated $15 to a progressive political action committee on the day that President Biden was sworn in. What we don't know is the motive behind this. We're hearing that from the Republican campaign that President Trump is doing well, he's received treatment, he's travelled back to New Jersey. One man has died, 2 men are in hospital, and there's been a huge reaction to this. Obviously people hear shock, disbelief, anger that this what's been called an assassination attempt has happened. Chaotic scenes as the shooting broke out. Police and security intervened. In a press conference earlier this morning, police chiefs were saying that officers acted heroically, but many questions were asked at a press conference earlier this morning around how this happened, around the response, the police response to this, and whether the resourcing, the security resourcing at this event was adequate. The Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, has said in a statement that the House will conduct a full investigation of the tragic events today. And the Republican Party convention is due to start this week, so it remains to be seen how this will play out. And the Republicans are saying that this could mean a win for Donald Trump in the general election in November.
OK, Jenny, thank you very much indeed for joining us very, very early in the morning there in America. A welcome to you all on a very dramatic news morning. Kim, of course, you're a Labour MP in your own right, but many of our audience will also remember that Jo Cox, the MP who was killed in terrible circumstances here in 2016, was your sister. So I have to ask, what went through your mind when you heard this news?
Shocking scenes coming from America this morning. Shocking and deeply disturbing and deeply upsetting. I woke up excited to come on your show for the first time to talk about the Labour government and all our fantastic plans that we've got and talk about England playing football tonight. And then suddenly we see the scenes that we've seen on our TV screens this morning. And we're back again having that conversation about what democracy looks like, what our politics looks like. There is absolutely no place for violence in a decent, civilised democracy and society. And those scenes are deeply shocking. I think it's also important to acknowledge, I understand one person has lost their life, others have been injured. I'm very pleased that President Trump is OK, but there have been other casualties. We've got to have that conversation about what a civilised democracy looks like. I've been having it since Jo was killed. I sadly feel that we're not making huge amounts of progress in this country and in other countries, and we've got to keep having that conversation. And
we're going to do that this morning. Samuel, you've spent time in America, you've got family in America. When you look at these events, what does it make you consider?
Yeah, I think, yes, they're shocking events, but we have to be honest about the fact that America has an absolutely bonkers situation when it comes to guns. You know, I think it was said earlier, there are 3 guns for every citizen. If you go in Oklahoma, Alabama or Texas today, you can go to a supermarket and buy bullets through a vending machine. And there are people who fiercely defend, of course, the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms. And so I struggle as somebody who has family members in the States to see how they get through this in a way that makes sense. You know, I think they're so far, they've had 4 presidents assassinated. They're so far down the road in terms of how they are dealing with the question of folks having arms, and they need to have some serious conversations, which I have to say I'm not hopeful they will have, despite the events of last night.
And Greg, we will talk about green energy and what's happening with the economy later in the programme, but you know, a citizen like all of us waking up to this news, what did you think?
Yeah, I think, first of all, this is the actions of one individual, and we don't yet know the details.
Indeed.
But you can't help but see it in the context of increased polarisation and extremism in political discourse across many countries. And, you know, I also, when I heard the news, kind of thought, look, the politics with violence is absolutely unacceptable, because if we can't talk to each other, we can't solve problems. And, of course, here in the UK, you know, we've seen 2 MPs murdered in recent years. And, you know, sadly, Kim's sister was one of them. And I think we have to ask politicians and the media to be responsible when we're talking about issues, because we can't go around whipping up the frenzies that lead to this kind of thing.
And do you feel as a citizen that that's happened in this country too in the last few years?
Yeah, look, I think the casual use of violent rhetoric in social media really does kind of foment an atmosphere of extremism. And, you know, we know that some of the social media companies promote the posts which are the most divisive because they cause people to react most and spend most time there. We kind of need to move away from that.
OK, all right, we'll be back with you later in the programme. Well, the Prime Minister, the new Prime Minister, of course, is fresh from his own White House visit, has condemned the attack on President Trump this morning. Sir Keir Starmer said he was appalled and that political violence has no place in any form in our society. Well, his colleague, Lucy Powell, is the new leader of the House of Commons. Welcome to the studio in your new role. And we must start then with your reaction to what has happened in America.
Well, these are appalling scenes. This is a horrific incident which we condemn completely and fulsomely. And thankfully, the President Trump was not injured more seriously. The consequences of that are unthinkable. But the thoughts of the whole British government, I'm sure the whole country of Britain, are with the American people and President Trump's family and those affected today.
We don't know the motive of this one individual. We don't know about the absolute circumstances behind this attack. But as our panel was just discussing, you do see a real polarisation in American politics. As a government, do you worry about that?
Well, we have seen a rise in polarisation. We have seen a rise in political intimidation, political hate. Obviously, you've already been discussing, we've seen the murder of two of my colleagues, my good friend Joe Cox and David Amess, a wonderful MP as well. So we have to take these issues incredibly seriously. We've seen necessary improvements to the security of MPs and to those seeking office as elected candidates. Thankfully, this election didn't have any serious incidents involved in it, although we have seen incidents of intimidation and deep fake and news and disinformation and misinformation being spread online about people. But we have to uphold the essence of our democracy as well. And as constituency MPs, as a constituency-based democracy, having contact with our constituents, the public, is a core part of our democracy, and we have to be able to uphold that. And we have seen some of the best of our democracy in the last few weeks as well. People took to the ballot box to vote for change, and boy, have they got change. And we're an incoming government who recognises that we need to govern in the interests of the whole country and really deliver on that mandate of change that people have given us.
And we'll come to your plans for the King's Speech this week in just a second. But although, as you say, there don't appear to have been any very serious incidents, mercifully, in our election campaign, there is plenty of evidence of real intimidation, what many of our viewers would look at and think is real harassment, potentially criminal behaviour. And the government's independent advisor on political violence, John Woodcock, now Lord Walney, has called on the Home Secretary to investigate this further, to allow him to document what he calls a dark underbelly of abuse and possible coordination between groups who are intimidating candidates. Do you think that people who were trying deliberately to intimidate MPs may have been doing so in a coordinated manner?
I think it's too early to say that. There definitely has been a dark underbelly in certain constituencies, in certain communities, in certain places and online during this election. I've seen it myself. I saw it not just in this election, but in the local elections and those before it. Our Security Minister, our new Security Minister, Dan Jarvis, has been speaking to every individual affected over this campaign. The Home Secretary is looking at these issues. The Speaker has been very clear about it as well. We have put in place a lot of extra security measures, but we've got to look at this in the round. You know, where is this coming from? Where is this hate being spread? How is it being spread? What does it lead to? The dehumanisation of politicians, and where that is veering into harassment, intimidation, and in some cases, violence. That, as you say, individual incidents on their own may not cross a criminal threshold, but taken together are a disturbing, worrying pattern that we need to tackle.
But we've heard from Kim this morning already. It's 8 years since Jo Cox was killed. I know she was a close friend of yours as well as Kim's sister. She doesn't think that progress is being made. And we have heard from our politicians time and again, yes, we must take this seriously. But evidence from this election campaign appears to suggest that actually things have been getting worse.
Well, look, we're in very fast-moving times, and I think the rise of information being spread, or disinformation, misinformation, deep fakes we've seen in this election as well, purporting to be particular politicians and then proven to be completely deep fakes. You know, the new technologies, the new way of sharing, you know, that has grown exponentially, unfortunately, since Jo's murder and other incidents. And I wrote about that at the time, and we are seeing that radicalising some people and informing their opinions incorrectly. So we've got to look at the root causes as well. We've got to look at the root causes, absolutely. And the measures have been put in place over recent years. We have got the Online Safety Act, thankfully, but we need to look at further measures there as well. And the Home Secretary is taking this incredibly seriously.
But quite a lot of your colleagues I've been speaking to in the last few days believe that this election was actually a tipping point where people were using intimidation as an electoral tactic. They were using intimidation to try to win seats. And some of your colleagues lost their seats. One of them in particular, Jonathan Ashworth, lost his seat, and there's now an investigation into what happened there. But do you think that this election we saw something new? We saw intimidation as an electoral tactic, not just people wanting to have a go at an MP.
It is evolving all the time, and I've seen some of the footage relating to Jonathan Ashworth and other of my colleagues, Rushanara Ali, others have been subject to that, and those things are being looked at, and there are some questions, very serious questions to answer there. And I think the police need to also, I mean, the police in Greater Manchester, in my area, took these issues very seriously when they were reported. I don't know that that was the case across all police forces, but I think upholding our democracy, because this is not about individual politicians seeking sympathy or wanting more security. This is a fundamental issue about upholding our democracy, people being able to freely vote for who they want to vote for, people being able to stand for election without fear of intimidation, abuse and harassment. These are core values that represent our country, and we take them very seriously. And what I'd also say is that part of what the Prime Minister has done since he's become Prime Minister only a week or so ago is to try and reset the tone of the political debate in this country. He is governing for everybody, no matter who they voted for, every part of the country. He wants to bring people together, taking down the pressure and the polarisation in our politics. And I think that's really important too, because we have seen the best of our democracy as well in recent weeks. People voted for change, they've got change, and we're going to help deliver that change.
Okay, well, let's talk about what some of that might look like. We've got less time this morning than we would normally have to look ahead to the King's speech, but you are announcing, we expect, a huge number of things, maybe 35 bills, sets of new laws. We can just have a look at some of them here. You're going to have planning reform, you're going to talk about house building, you're going to talk about all sorts of things, setting up GB Energy, a clean, green energy company, a national one for the first time. But one interesting thing in the last week that's happened is the Prime Minister, the Justice Secretary, the Health Secretary have all popped up to say, oh, things are even worse than we thought, except that much of the information you're talking about has been in the public domain, and you spent the election campaign telling us how ready you are to get going. So are you really shocked by what you found, or is this just a way of saying to the public it's going to take us longer than we thought to turn things around?
Well, look, the first thing to say is, obviously, I can't confirm what is or isn't in the King's speech. That's for the King to announce. But we are putting forward a very ambitious, packed, fully costed, bold programme of our legislative programme for this first session. It's a down payment on that change that we've got a mandate to deliver, and we are confident. We have been working on it for months. You know, this is not just a sort of shopping list of things we quite like to do. These are fully considered, worked up bills that we know we can get through in this parliamentary session, hopefully and they will bring about that change. But look, I mean, I think there's no question that in this election, what we were saying, what other people were saying, is that many aspects of our country were broken. And that's clearly the case, whether that's high waiting lists, whether that's prisons that were overcrowded. We've been highlighting those issues for a long time. But of course, when you're in government, you actually get to see a lot more of the detail, a lot more of the paperwork. You get to speak to a lot more of the officials than you could ever do in opposition. And it is, I'm afraid, the case that when we have opened the bonnet, when we have looked under the bonnet, things are even worse than we thought, and we are going to have to take action. And we're not going to pretend to people. I think this is part of the challenge with the discourse in our politics, that we can't flick a switch and change things overnight. This is going to take serious focus, serious determination, hard work, and we are setting out a legislative programme to match that, which is ambitious and bold, but will take a lot of time and energy and hard work from ministers to actually deliver.
OK, Lucy Powell, we'll let you get back to that hard work. And of course, it will be your job to get all of that through the House of Commons. But it's great to have you with us in the studio in your new job. Thanks very much indeed for coming in. Well, let's get back to the big story this morning, the attempted assassination of Donald Trump. We can speak now to Nigel Farage, MP, leader of Reform UK, and a friend, of course, of Donald Trump. Good morning to you. What did you think when you heard the news, first of all?
Well, I was very upset, and I'm still upset. I'm obviously pleased that my friend Donald's got away with it. Only just, but he's got away with it. But one person is dead. Two more are fighting for their lives in hospital. So it's an absolutely horrendous incident. And yet, somehow, I'm not shocked by it. The narrative that is put out there about Trump by these liberals that oppose him is so nasty, is so unpleasant, that I think it almost encourages this type of behaviour.
Are you suggesting that the political environment is to blame for this?
Well, you could always pick out quotes. I mean, it was just a few weeks ago that Joe Biden said Trump must be put in the bullseye. And, you know, we talked earlier on this programme about social media, and that's quite right. There are some things that are said on social media that aren't acceptable. But there is also a mainstream media narrative. And I'm afraid it's very, very one-sided. The BBC is a part of this. It's happening in this country. I mean, I've faced continual attacks for over a decade now. Because it's me, no one cares. In fact, it's even funny, you know. I mean, one of the many times that I had a drink thrown at me, you know, a comedian, so-called comedian on a BBC show says, well, why not battery acid? I mean, I just find the fact that that individual, Joe Brand, is still on BBC programmes, I find that really pretty appalling. We've got Mr. Aronovich, who does programmes on Radio 4, who recently said that the best way for the Democrats to deal with Trump is to have him shot. Now he says now that was a joke. But so I do think mainstream media, I do think liberal intolerance is increasingly a part of this problem. And yet,
Mr. Farage, you're not suggesting surely that this is coming only from one side. If we concentrate on what's happened in America, do the Republicans also not have a responsibility in terms of creating a political environment? Many of Donald Trump's supporters have on many occasions used incredibly direct language here.
Oh, that's right. And look, there are extremists on both sides of the political divide. And if they're mere supporters, that's a very difficult thing for political parties, apart from condemning it, to deal with. What I'm saying is there is a narrative that has been built up for many, many years. And I see it myself. I mean, people hate me, not because of what I've said, not because of what I've done, but because of things that are broadcast about me on, you know, radio stations, TV channels, regulated by Ofcom or the BBC itself. And you know, I've lived with this for a very, very long time. I think all MPs from all sides now are increasingly at risk. But I do think, I'm sorry, but I do think mainstream media has a lot to do with this.
What impact do you think that this might have, though, on the presidential race in America?
Well, the problem is that, you know, Trump lives and breathes by big rallies. And I've been to maybe a dozen of them myself, you know, sometimes 10,000 people, sometimes 50,000 people. It's the energy that's generated from those events that spreads out through communities and gets him his vote. Now, security, Secret Service is always incredibly strict. But if someone's got a high velocity rifle I think in this case, the guy was about 150 yards away. But I mean, you know, a rifle like that can be very effective and very accurate up to 1,000 yards. So it is difficult to see, you know, does Trump go on doing what he's always done? And I faced this in the general election. The second or third day of the campaign, I got to Barnsley. I was told by the police, do not get off the bus or you'll be hurt. And as it was, some cement was thrown at me and some stones were thrown at the bus. So you know, the problem with this is, how do you go out and campaign? Think of John Major 30 years ago, a soapbox in Market Squares. Couldn't do that today. So we finish up with our political leaders never meeting a voter, never meeting the public. I suspect, knowing Trump as I do, he will carry on regardless.
OK, Nigel Farage, thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning with this developing story across the Atlantic. And you can tell us what is on your mind. There are details. You can email me, kuenssberg@bbc.co.uk, or if social media is your thing, you can use the hashtag #BBCLauraK. And as ever, we will try to share some of your views towards the end of the programme. Let's then see what our panel made of what we heard. So, Kim, when you heard Lucy Powell talking about this problem we've had with MP security and saying that measures have been taken over the years, what did you think of what she had to say?
So, look, I think it is really important that we do take measures to protect elected people. But I am much more interested in the root causes of how our political debate has become so toxic and so divisive. And I think that is the thing that we've got to address. And we've got to look at the role and responsibility of everybody involved in that. That is elected people behaving responsibly. And I do think Keir has done a fantastic job of setting out a new approach to politics. This job is about public service. It's not about you. It's not about your ego and your own agenda. It's about serving the people you have been elected by and serving the country. So I think there is a good piece of resetting being done there around what politics is about and then what does that look like. I think it's absolutely right to talk about social media, to talk about media generally, and also about personal responsibility. We all have a responsibility for what comes out of our mouths.
But what is then the root causes? So Lucy was saying, well, we have to look at the root causes. You've gone straight to the root cause. But what is the root cause, do you think, that drives people, and I'm not speculating about the individual behind the attack on Trump, but what is the root cause that might drive people to perhaps come up to you as an MP in the street and start having a go at you, or to go online and say terrible things about elected politicians?
Well, I think part of it is people's disillusion with politics, and part of that is the responsibility of people in public office. You know, we've seen some pretty poor behaviour at times from elected people, so we've got to look at ourselves and look at how we behave and the standards that we set. The media's got its job to do as well. I often talk about the fact that loads of really good stuff goes on in Parliament and we never see it on the telly, we never see it in the papers. There's a lot of cross-party working that goes on. You know, I've got good friendships across the House, but that doesn't get focused on. It's the division and the arguments that get focused on. So there's the media. Social media, again, you know, the whole anonymity that social media gives to people, the things that you might have said, you know, 20 years ago in the pub to your mates on a Friday night, you now put it out there. But it's a complex conversation and there isn't one cause. And there's lots of different aspects to it.
And Samuel, as a politician, you know, with the sort of rising generation, right, who wants to be involved, I mean, sometimes people might imagine, actually, why do you want to get involved when it's so toxic?
Yeah, I ask myself that question very, very often, to be honest. I mean, as you will probably remember, when I left my job in Downing Street, one of the things I warned about was this politics of division.
That's right. Under Boris Johnson. So you worked for Boris Johnson and then you quit because you were unhappy at the direction of travel. Yeah, because I felt like politicians, well, I feel like politicians have a responsibility to have some candour about how they articulate themselves and recognise that their words have power. And in fact, my first interview after I left, I said, well, we don't want to have another situation like Joe Cox. And within a year, of course, of that interview, David Amos sadly was murdered. And so whilst it is always the responsibility of the individual who commits the crime for the crime, I think we all have a role to play as a political class. And people always talk about the root causes. One of the things that I think often gets missed is this idea of being able to bring people together. So we are in the UK, in the US to an extent, we're a nation of different types of groups, and we've evolved greatly over the last 75, 76 years since the time of the Empire Wind Rush and Commonwealth migrants and migration from Europe, etc. But no government has ever really focused on, OK, so how then
can we all be brought together? How can we find ways to build relationships with people that might feel or think differently from ourselves, might have different cultural norms, etc. And you know, we'll probably talk later about the Euro final, and that's an opportunity that brings people together. In 2012, we had the Olympics. That brought people together, but we can't just have events. We have to have sustainable moments for us to build bridges and a collective culture and identity that we can all feel a part of as well.
And that's the impact on democracy, isn't it? We lose good people from public life, and there's many examples of people who've stepped away, not solely because of intimidation and threats, but partly because of that. And also, why would a young person want to get involved in politics when they see how toxic it can be? And that's the risk that we've got to our democracy.
And what kind of thing in this campaign have you seen, Kim?
I have to say, my campaign in my new seat of Spen Valley was very civilised. In the main part, I was very fortunate. But some of the things that we've seen, some of the things that our colleagues have been through, Shabana Mahmood, Jess Phillips, Rushan Arali, Helen Hayes, you know, I could go on. I could go on. The personal insults, the attacks, the posters of people's faces, you know, I mean, just horrendous types of intimidation and threatening behaviours. And then also activists, you know, people who are doing this on a voluntary basis because they believe in a person or they believe in a political party, going out on the streets, being shouted at, having things thrown at them. You know, is that what our democracy looks like? It's absolutely fine to disagree passionately and robustly. I'd be the first person to say, let's sit down and talk about it. Let's have a chat. Let's have a conversation about it. But if we resort to violence and threats and abuse and intimidation, there is a deeply worrying impact on our democracy, and we have got to push back on that as much as we can.
I mean, it's a tall order, Greg, though, isn't it? You know, we have a big, complicated society, and it does seem that a lot of people might imagine, you know, the genie's out the bottle. People have forgotten how to disagree in a civil way.
I think, first of all, it's worth thinking a little bit about historical context.
Yeah.
In my lifetime, I've seen President Reagan get shot, John Lennon being assassinated, the Pope being shot. You know, public figures have always, unfortunately, been exposed to the actions of individuals. I think the reaction to this is what's important. Is our reaction that we become more polarised, or that we come together and recognise that more civil discourse can lead to better outcomes? So, for example, I mentioned social media earlier, the extremes. But, you know, social media is also the place that I talk to our customers, that I speak to other policymakers, and that I learn about how people feel about issues. And so I think with the bad, there's also so much good. And I think if we can work out how to build on that good, we don't want a world in which politicians have to be hermetically sealed for safety, right? I'm so proud that in Britain I still see, you know, I've seen members of the shadow cabinet, well, now the cabinet, on the tube. And you see them cycling around town. We need a world in which politicians are on with the rest of us all the time. Without that, how are they going to know what's really going on in the world, and how can we engage with them in positive ways?
And that is the best part of the job. The best part of the job is being out meeting people. I was at 3 schools on Friday. I did about 3 summer fairs yesterday, and I love it. I love that. That is the best part of the job. I don't want to stop doing that.
But also for context, you know, folks here don't have guns, right?
Yeah, and we should say it's a very different...
So whilst we have similar challenges around division, we are not as bonkers as the US. I mean, I know people who have kids in the US and they're saying to themselves, you know, can I live here in the long term? Because you can be walking down the street and there's a guy... In fact, I was in Texas, I remember very vividly, and I got into a really interesting conversation with a Uber driver who then basically disclosed to me that he had a gun in the car. And I'm thinking to myself, why am I in a taxi with a dude with a gun? And that is just the norm in that country. It's absolutely bonkers, and they need to do something. And I don't know what, but it's a challenge.
OK. Greg, just before we move on, this is a very busy news day, but I do want to get your take. You're the boss of a big energy company. This week, we're going to hear from the new government what they want to do about that central promise, one of the central promises they made, a new company called GB Energy that's apparently going to be the answer to all of the problems, and bills are going to go down, and we're going to have clean power by 2030. Is what they're promising, clean power by 2030, realistic?
It's perfectly possible. It needs extremely rapid and focused action. I think one of the very positive things in the recent election was that the attempt to create a lot of negativity, culture wars over net zero failed. The government won when one of its 5 key pledges was around green prosperity, green growth. And the reality is British citizens know that the best way to more secure, cheaper and, of course, greener power is renewables. And so seeing the government come out the sort of starting blocks, immediately announcing planning reform, authorising the building of solar farms, is a really good start. I think there's a couple of things we need to see now. First of all, it's great that we can look forward to being able to build stuff, but we'll also need to be able to connect it to the grid. And grid connections have ground to a halt in the UK. It needs really rapid action. There's a solar farm we want to build in County Durham. We get a grid connection in 2037. That means waiting 13 years for us to be able to invest, to create the jobs in building that, but also for citizens to get cheaper power. And we also need to see market reform. Look, if we had regional pricing in the UK for electricity, every region would be cheaper than it is now. Scotland would have the cheapest electricity in Europe. The UK could win investment from things like data centres and factories that need access to cheap power. That investment's been going abroad until now. So I think with rapid action, following up on the planning announcements, we really can see cheaper power as we build our own secure renewables here.
OK, well, there's your elevator pitch to the government. I think you're saying thanks very much for what you've already said, but you want even more. Well, we'll see what happens, and there'll be lots of discussion.
Ed Miliband is on it.
OK,
he's on it.
Well, we'll see what happens with the King's Speech later on this week. But the main thing we've been discussing this morning is the attempted assassination attack yesterday of the former President Donald Trump in Pennsylvania. He survived. His 20-year-old attacker was shot and killed by the American Secret Service. And of course, there'll be huge questions about how that was able to happen at a rally where there should have been extremely tight security in place. The attack has been condemned by President Biden and, of course, by the Prime Minister too, Sir Keir Starmer. One member of the crowd who was at the event has sadly died. And there'll be plenty of coverage of that across the BBC today, and we'll talk a bit more about it in the programme later on. But one of the government's new plans is to give extra powers to politicians around the country. The Prime Minister invited powerful mayors from around the country to Number 10 this week. There they are, selfies on the doorstep of Number 10, getting down to business with the new Prime Minister. And one of them, you can just see him there in the corner of the shot. I'm not sure if he's listening with rapt attention or remembering who used to sit in that chair, but one of them is Lord Houchen, the Mayor of Teesside, who, as a Conservative, has bucked the national trend of the last year and was re-elected in May. And by our reckoning, Lord Houchen, you're probably the most powerful Conservative politician in the country as things stand. Good morning.
Morning, thanks for having me on. I think that entirely depends who you speak to, but I'll certainly take it if you want to give it. But I think there are some leadership contenders that would probably suggest that they're in a better position than I am.
Well, we'll come to them in just a second. Of course, your party got hammered at the polls a week last Thursday. Why do you think that took place?
Well, we lost the election last week because of the perception within the public that we'd lost all sort of competence to be able to run effective government. We'd lost the trust of the British people, and that was a long tail of U-turns, of infighting, of changing prime ministers. And again, I talked about this over the last week since the election. I hope that the Conservative Party learns that lesson rather than the lesson that some want to suggest was the one that we need to learn from the election, which is that we need to lurch more to the left or the right. I think that completely misses the point. I don't think, particularly in hindsight, there is a set of policy that we put to the public. We could have had the best manifesto in the world, but I do think we would have lost this election. Again, not because of the ideology, but because I think people were fed up and they just thought, irrespective of what we promised, they didn't think that we were actually being able to deliver on those promises. We've broken that trust, we've broken that confidence in the British public, and that's what we need to get back to, because that is one of the core principles of a successful Conservative government. Sometimes people don't like it, sometimes people vote for us through gritted teeth, but actually they vote for us because we are very, very effective at governing, and we've lost that. And if we don't bring that back, then I think we'll condemn ourselves to many, many years in opposition.
So you're warning the party not to lurch more to the left, or certainly not to lurch to the right, as you just said. But how do you restore a reputation for competence, not just when you're in opposition, but when, as things stand, the party hasn't even been able to agree how to run its leadership contest for the next candidate?
Well, it's going to take time, and these things happen because let's not underestimate the scale of the defeat that we had last week. That's changed the party makeup within Parliament. It's had a huge impact on Conservative headquarters and the membership at large. And so there is a reflection period that we're going to have. That's going to take time. We can't get our act together just in the first few weeks after such a historic defeat. We need to be able to reflect sensibly on it. We need to, again, start to learn the right lessons from it and start to build from there. We've got some time. We now have a government that has a significant majority. It doesn't look like they're going anywhere anytime soon. But we do need to get there relatively quickly, because without a successful and competent opposition, I think Parliament in and of itself starts to break down and doesn't work as effectively as it could do. But we've got some time. There's work that needs to be done. But the important thing is what comes out of this leadership contest. We need to make sure we find the right leader to navigate us through what is going to be a very, very difficult time, to try and unite the party, because as with any political party, there are different factions and different groups that we should think different ways, and that will be the first test, because the next couple of years are going to be very difficult for the Conservative Party to find itself again, what it means to govern effectively, what it wants to offer to the public over the next 4 or 5 years, and so the next 18 months are going to be a treacherous one for the Conservative Party.
Lord Houchen, you just suggested the leadership race should be a bit like, you know, Goldilocks. It shouldn't be too long, but it shouldn't be too short. Do you think the leader needs to be in place by the party conference in the autumn?
I certainly think there or thereabouts. I can understand from some people that they think that there should be some sort of additional process that could take place at conference, whether that could be a hustings or something. But I think certainly in the first half of October, we need to be getting to a place where we do have a leader in place. I think the honest answer is we know roughly, don't we, the likely candidates who are going to put themselves forward for the leadership contest. I think some have probably already declared. If they haven't, it's pretty obvious. They're pretty well known to the Conservative Party. We roughly know where they stand in the Conservative Party spectrum. Yes, there's a process to go through for them to be able to put themselves forward to say what would they would offer a new Conservative Party. But the idea we need a long and protracted process that gets into some sort of existential crisis about what the Conservative Party stands for and what these leadership contenders stand for would be a waste of time, because, like I say, they're going to be relatively well known to us. There may be a couple of wild cards that decide to put themselves forward that could try and change that dynamic ever so slightly. But again, if we have it too long, and we look and we navel gaze for too long, that's going to turn off the public even more, because it again feeds into that perception that we're more concerned about the ongoings of the Conservative Party rather than what the public care about, which is how do we help improve their lives, how do we help improve our communities, and how do we help improve local public services.
And given that they're already pretty much well known, as you've said, do you know who you will back yet? And have they been on the phone begging for your vote?
I honestly don't know who I'm going to be backing yet. I think it would be remiss of me to try and pretend otherwise, Laura, but absolutely a number of the contenders have already been contacting me, and over the coming weeks I'll be meeting with them because they've asked to meet with me to discuss their intentions. But we'll have to wait and see what happens, because again, while lots of the contenders I think are pretty well known to most people, it will depend on what their offering for this Conservative Party is going to be, because we are in a new world. The Conservative Party is very different to the one it was just a few weeks ago, and so while those people are familiar to us, we also need to understand what their positions are on rebuilding the Conservative Party, what the hard yards are going to be that they're going to put in over the next 12, 18 months, 24 months to be able to rebuild the Conservative Party from within, but also start to reach out to the public to be able to rebuild that trust and confidence, which, let's be honest, is going to take a significant period of time.
And once upon a time, there was a well-known prominent mayor in a big city in England who ended up using that platform to become the Conservative leader. That was one Boris Johnson. Would you rule out having a tilt at it yourself one day?
Yeah, I mean, it's not for me. I'm very proud of the role that I play as mayor in Teesside. I just don't think it's not really for me. My job is the one that I've got. This is a dream job for me. I think the Conservative Party can play a lot of good in the discourse of the country. I think we can do a lot of good things for the country. I think we've got to get back to that. And I think I can play a significant role in helping the Conservative Party rebuild itself and be a fighting force when it comes to the political election, whether in the next election or the one after that. But again, there are many more people in Westminster who are much more ambitious and qualified than I am. So I'll leave it to them for now.
OK, Lord Houchen, thank you very much. It's great to have you on the programme with us. And do come back once we see what happens with Keir Starmer's plans to give you and mayors around the country more power. Be interesting in the next few months to see who that pans out. But we'll let you go and check your phone and see if any leadership candidates have called you while you've been on the TV. Let's go back there now to our main story this morning, which is making huge headlines, not just here, but around the world. The attempted assassination last night of Donald Trump at a political rally in Pennsylvania. He has been treated in hospital and is home in New Jersey. The gunman has been named as 20-year-old Thomas Matthew Crooks. He was shot and killed by the Secret Service. One spectator has sadly been killed and 2 others are critically injured. Donald Trump himself has responded on his social media platform, Truth Social. He said, "I want to extend my condolences to the family of the person at the rally who was killed and also to the family of another person that was badly injured. It is incredible that such an act can take place in our country. He goes on to say, I knew immediately something was wrong. I heard a whizzing sound, shots, and immediately felt the bullet ripping through the skin. Much bleeding took place, so I realised then what was happening. God bless America. That a message from President Trump himself. Now, let's speak to somebody who was at the event. James Fletcher can join us, and he was at the rally in Pennsylvania. Good morning to you. Thank you for joining us. What did you see?
So I was there, not very close to the stage. The whole setup of the Trump rally is obviously mostly a televised event, and so very few people are actually close to him when he's on stage. I was probably about 100 meters back, but I obviously heard the gunfire. Because of the sound of the event from the audio system and a bit of wind, it was very hard to judge in any way where the shots were coming from. So initially, people were pretty silent and disorientated. Also, it's worth mentioning it wasn't automatic fire, which made, for me, quite a difference in knowing that it was unlikely a mass shooting event. You could tell they were purposeful single shots taken.
And James, did it feel like an event that was well organised, where security was tight? Because we've heard from some eyewitnesses already, they actually saw somebody on a roof with a gun, which seems extraordinary to imagine that could have been allowed to happen within shooting distance, literally, of the former president. But did it feel to you like an event that was safe or ought to have been safe?
Well, there are two parts to this. Getting into the event was very carefully managed by the Secret Service with airport-style security and very thorough bag checks, so there was no nonsense there. Where the shooter was outside the secure area, and undoubtedly there were going to be some very serious questions to be asked and answered about how on earth it was possible for someone in broad daylight to get access to, I think it was a white roof, and therefore pretty conspicuous. And also, it turns out, in direct sight of the Secret Service agents that were very conspicuously on the roof behind President Trump. So I do think there are going to be some serious recriminations after this.
And what was the atmosphere then like in the crowd? I mean, some people must have been terrified by what happened, but you said intriguingly there was sort of silence to begin with.
Well, there was, in a sense, because of the noise of the event and the wind and the distance of the shooter. It's actually very hard to pinpoint where the shots were fired from. And so, in fact, if you think about it, in a sense, if you don't know where the safe place is to go, you kind of don't want to be running in the wrong direction in case you're running towards danger. So a lot of people, and me included, were somewhat disorientated by the fact that we were standing in the middle of this field, knowing there was obviously danger from a gun, but not knowing where to go. And once it became apparent that it was an assassination attempt rather than a mass shooting, in a funny way, the crowd became kind of calm and people left in a pretty orderly manner. And that was the end of it.
James Fletcher, thank you so much for joining us at the very early hours of the night where you are in Pittsburgh. So thank you very much indeed for joining us on Sunday morning here in the UK. Thank you. Well, of course, America is right in the middle of the race for the White House. The former president's trying to unseat the current occupant, Joe Biden, who separately has been facing calls from his own side to pull out of the race. The well-known American pollster, Frank Luntz, can join us now. Thanks for making the time, Frank. What do you think the effect will be on this race?
I think it's going to cause people to reach the conclusion that we talked about on Newsnight a few weeks ago, that the democracy that Americans sometimes take for granted is really under significant threat, that people are willing to take matters into their own hands, that the civility and decency and respect that we expect and demand from our politicians is lacking, and it's causing real damage. Specifically on the vote, this is going to have an impact not on who people support, but on their likelihood of getting out and actually participating. I think you're going to see a 1 or 2% addition to Donald Trump's vote, particularly in the state that this happened, Pennsylvania, which is a critical swing state, because every Trump voter in Pennsylvania is going to participate. The intensity of that vote, we've probably never seen anything like it, and that in itself could make a difference in November.
So you really think this could play in significantly to the race for the White House?
I think it's going to have a significant impact, but I'm not truly looking for the next election, although November is important, obviously. I'm thinking about the next generation. We haven't had this kind of violence since 1981 when Reagan was shot, and it does not bode well for the country. I know that you've experienced this in the UK as well. At a certain point, these politicians have to stand up and say, enough. Just put your hands up and say, we're not going to do this anymore. Because the consequence of this is so significant, not just in our participation, but in our faith and confidence that democracy actually works, that our voice is heard, and that we matter as individuals.
But who do you think bears responsibility for the climate that has been created? We heard from Nigel Farage earlier, who spends a lot of time in America, that he pointed the finger, might not surprise you, but very much at what he calls the mainstream media for whipping up a certain environment. And he pointed the finger at what he would say are liberals. But in your view, whose responsibility for creating the current political climate in America? I mean, what do you think Donald Trump's responsibility is too?
That's a fantastic question. And the answer is all of us. And I'm sorry that he chose to be partisan at this moment, because there are people on the left, there are people on the right, that there are too many people in America looking for the negative, looking for the opposition, trying to find the best line that will sound great as a soundbite. And then the media reports it. If the media did not have the context for this, did not have the content for this, it would not be happening. And so I say to everyone who's watching right now, particularly in the UK, don't let this come to your country. Hold people accountable on your own side. So if you're a conservative, challenge the conservatives. If you're Labour, challenge Labour. That if we don't take personal responsibility for this, I as a pollster and a language person, there is a time when I contributed to it. And I think it's important that we all recognize that we're at the breaking point right now. This will help Donald Trump in the end, just as the police who killed George Floyd ended up creating a significant change in the public's attitude. I think we're going to have that right here in America, and maybe it'll transfer itself to the UK. But make no mistake, we are at the breaking point, and we need to look beyond traditional partisanship to our country and its future and the legacy that we are creating right now for our children and our grandchildren.
Okay, Frank Luntz, well, words matter, and thank you for joining our conversation here in the UK this morning. Thank you.
It's a privilege.
Now, time for something completely different, because in case you haven't noticed, there has been more than one big contest capturing the attention of lots of us in the last week. Not the election, the Euros in Germany, with England managing to make it to the final tonight. Their Spanish rivals are the favourites, but could it, might it, possibly, maybe be England's night? Millions of us are crossing our fingers, I think Kim's doing that right next to me at the desk, and sending the team all the best.
Finds Watkins. Watkins turns! Watkins scores!
My lover's got no money, he's got his strong beliefs. My lover's got no power, he's got his strong beliefs. My lover's got no fame, he's got his strong beliefs. My lover's got no money, he's got his strong beliefs.
On behalf of the entire country, I want to wish you the very best of luck for the Euro finals tonight. Now, you don't need our good luck, because you're there because of your talent, your skills and your hard graft. You have already made our country so proud, and we're backing you all of the way.
Well, these guys at the table, have you been cheering just while we were showing the images from the last few days? But a nice side hustle of being the Prime Minister is a ticket to the match tonight. So Keir Starmer, who's a real football fan, is off there. But the BBC's Kelly Summers will be pitch side with the players. And she has, for weeks, been with them every step of the way.
Hi Laura, hi everyone, welcome to Berlin. I'm around 7 miles from the stadium where Spain will take on England in the Euro 2024 final. I don't know if you can hear the England fans, but they have arrived in the city in their droves and are making plenty of noise. This is a city filled with so much history, and the Three Lions could be about to make more history once again. I've been out here now for almost 5 weeks following them. I've been at their base in eastern Germany in Blankenheim. I've done, I think, about 12 interviews with Gareth Southgate, and I've spoken to pretty much every single member of the squad. Been to all of the games as well, and it's been a bit of a roller coaster tournament from the very start, when performances weren't quite what we hoped for. A bit of noise from media and fans, but as they have gone through the gears, as they've gone in the knockout stage, it has been so exciting. They've been through pretty much everything, haven't they? They went to extra time and penalties, and that dramatic, a late winner from Ollie Watkins in the semi-final, and it's kind of affected the mood throughout as well. It's got better, the players have got more open. Gareth Southgate in particular has become a lot more open over the last week or so. He said he didn't even mind going to do multiple interviews with me, because of course the more games they won, the more he had to see me. The players once again been telling some brilliant stories. Jared Bowen told me how his dad was travelling all the way by camper van from Hull to every single game. Mark Gahey, one of the standout performers, spoke about his footballing idol Didier Drogba. It's been amazing. I also haven't been lucky enough, understandably, to get to the team hotel, but he had told us an amazing, had absolutely everything: darts, arcade, paddle, indoor and outdoor pools, a whole spa. So they have been treated very, very well indeed, but it has all paid off. Gareth Southgate and his squad, only the 5th team to make it to back-to-back Euros finals, the first English men's team to make it to a final overseas. Can they make history and win it and go one better than they did 3 years ago at Wembley? Tune in later on BBC One to find out.
I want to know who's been playing darts and who's been in a spa getting ready for the game. Kim, you were, I think, the kind of main person in the UK parliamentary women's football team. Where are you going to be watching the match tonight? You excited?
Yeah, I'm really excited. I'm a massive sports fan, big football fan. I am on the women's parliamentary football team, and I think the power that sport has to do good on the pitch and off the pitch is fantastic. Let's see if the men tonight can, do what the women did 2 years ago.
Yeah, don't forget, the women have already done it. Right. Greg, where are you going to watch?
I might be watching at home, actually, but with some people coming around. But look, we're all taught that it's taking part that counts. But honestly, if you're the national football team, it's 1,000 times better to win. And I loved the message from the King, which said, please, no more 90th minute, no more extra time, no more penalties. So, fingers crossed, toes crossed. This time we really must win.
Bring it home.
And Samuel, I know you're a bit of an armchair manager.
Oh, yeah, totally. Always get myself in trouble via Twitter. But yeah, I'm going to be watching at home with my kids who are going to be able to go to school later tomorrow. So the headmaster sent out a message saying so. That's great.
So the kids can have a lie-in if they can stay up tonight.
Well, to be honest, in the semi-finals, my 8-year-old was trying to stay awake, and I was watching him doze off. So hopefully today he won't do the same. But he made it to see the goal. What I would say is, firstly, England are peaking at the right time.
Yeah.
I think we've all been united in our criticism of Gareth Southgate in recent weeks, but he seems to have been the one that has vindicated all of his decisions. And I think it's very clear he's now, whatever the result tonight, the greatest England manager in history. I mean, he's the only one to reach 2 finals, bluntly. No one else has done it. And so, yeah, I'm hopeful. I think they're gonna do it.
Okay, well, we'll see. And I hope that it doesn't go to penalties also, so that your kids can stay up and watch it without actually falling asleep. But all three of you, thank you so much indeed for joining us this morning on a very busy morning for news. Thank you to you, of course, at home for watching us on this Sunday morning as we've been digesting the events across the Atlantic which have made headlines here and around the world, as we've seen the return of political violence to the United States during a presidential race. If you've just switched on, Donald Trump has survived an assassination attempt. He was last night at one of his big rallies in Pennsylvania as part of his campaign to return to the White House. The shooter was shot dead by the Secret Service at the scene, and one bystander was killed. Our teams across the BBC will have everything you need to know as events unfold and what happened becomes clearer through the day. A bit later, I will be with Paddy O'Connell on Sunday's newscast on BBC Sounds, and of course on TV, on BBC One, on radio and online tonight at 8 o'clock. England awaits. We'll see what happens there. And I will look forward to seeing you next Sunday, same time, same place.